for a spoon while she was having soup. And he was like, oh, did you want a dessert spoon? I was like, no, a spoon. You know, I was just a little tiny thing. He didn't know what we were doing. But I'm there lashing out at him anyway. And that's me again, a sort of semi-decently adjusted person in touch with my empathy, still losing the temper. Friends of mine in the anti-war movement, well, several of my friends will have possibly smoked weed in their life to help with the edge. Some of us have turned to alcohol. I'm grateful that I did not turn to alcohol, but I can't say I'm a lucky one. Some of my friends are. Dealing with family is a bit of an issue. If your family, like my family's full of patriots, so obviously the thank you for the service thing. My mom sent me a card on Veterans Day. It didn't come in the mail, some issue with the international mail. But when I brought it home in Christmas when I went home, oh, the thank you for the service thing, my mom was a little irate because she obviously sent something to say thank you for your service. I was like, Mom, you're the exception to the rule. But again, that connection with my family gets lost when they were all proud of me being in the military, and I lost my pride of being in the military. The personal costs of war for some of my friends and I, some of them will still enjoy the Veterans Day free meal, but still be like pissed with America for some reason or another. Our personal costs, we're not easy to deal with for some reason. I wonder why. Except for with each other. And so me and him, like my one friend I just mentioned before, he's the only military friend I still have from my time in the Army. Everybody else I know has gone on their separate ways. We've lost our friendship, the supposed brotherhood we had, the military is famous for. Some of us have wanted to commit suicide. I certainly was one of those people. Thankfully, I always said if I was to commit suicide, it'd be from falling off a tall building. And I'm afraid of heights, so I haven't quite made that leap yet. Morbid humor, too soon? But I say that. Thankfully, none of my friends have committed suicide. That being said, there was one person in the anti-war movement in America who committed suicide. I'm grateful that one of his legacies was a musical album that some of us will listen to. Again, we were part of also the anti-war movement, the anti-poverty movement, anti-racism movement, following the Poor People's Campaign. And so he would compare, like, why are we fighting, us poor farmers from Arkansas fighting a poor farmer from Afghanistan? Popular line that I love from that one song of his, Jacob George. You know, some of us have that critical mindset, and like I said, I could have, I'm glad I didn't. Some of us have, my heart mourns for them. In the military, I remember there was always a suicide prevention class. I think they told something like 20 people a day were committing suicide on estimate. It's one of those things. Is it the existential issue of purpose, hope, meaning, connection? I don't know. But it's a powerful toll, you know. Maybe it would have helped if they had the anti-war movement to help them. But even in the case of Jacob George, who had all of our support, and I didn't have the chance to meet him because he killed himself only 2 months before I joined, even that didn't help. And so the cost of war, yeah, I only joke about it because sometimes you can only help but laugh. There's other times where I cry. I have a few YouTube clips to help me cry. Like when Spock dies in Star Trek. You know what I'm saying? So because sometimes I just need that extra push to my psyche, you know, because I can't let it out otherwise. That's a personal cost of war that again, because of my chaplaincy time and chaplaincy assistant time, I can't help but bring up the emotional cost of war. All right. Some of us unable to keep jobs. I said before, my friend had issues with the postal workers. We seem, at least in America anyway, to get drawn into other military jobs like security, police work. In America, we also have guns as police, and I'm really hoping some of my fellow veterans don't become police officers because some of us shoot people. Some of us are better at not shooting people. It kind of depends on which way you go, but at the same time, I know I would not be able to be a police officer because I know I would not have the temper mentality to keep calm. And that is also an issue in America because we have guns. We have a stupid Second Amendment. I said it personally. You know, not saying, one time I did want to own a shotgun. Now I see how stupid that was. But in America, people have this fear mentality that someone's always out to get them. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. I certainly felt that way for a while. I'm grateful to be here where, and I hate to say it is a good thing, but knifings on a daily basis is better than thousands being killed by guns in America. Some of my fellow veterans are for gun rights. Some of my fellow veterans in America are not for gun rights. Because even in the Army, we had to put our guns in an armory. We're not allowed to have them on base. And we said, why are there better gun control laws on a base of soldiers than in America? Personal cost of war. Some of my friends went apeshit with their company. Excuse me, I shouldn't be cursing. Some of my friends have a fantastic collection of arms. Others are against munitions. That being said, the only guns I carry are these two right here. I have no intent of joking. Good crowd, all right. Yeah, some of us have issues with security jobs. A lot of us, again, joined for the GI Bill. Again, academia, I can't say a lot of academia courses are go into killing people, academia, right? It's history, it's medicine, it's law. You get my drift. One of the costs that we have is that people always want to stereotype us into these things and we want to do other things. And the only time I can say I'm ever grateful is because I needed an ex-forces program to get a job in this country. But other than that, I'm not really for using my military life to get a job. It's not who I am. Again, my desire is to be a religious professional one day for all of us to have one big world group hug. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's difficult to get a group hug in this world, let me put it that way. It's,
just got sign off.
right. One last thing I'll say and then I'll wrap up. I feel myself about to ramble about things that are on my list, but I'm not going to put you through that. One cost of war some of me and my fellow veterans have, like I said, is this, what I've now realized is what's been called hyper-masculinity, not patronizing, hyper-patriarchal behavior. Kind of stoic, emotions, logic gets separated, kind of a thing. And that gets promoted in the Army, I feel. Hyper-masculinity. Some of that is difficult to let go. I know a lot of us joined in our teen years, my friends and I certainly did. And we still have a habit sometimes. Like I said, I just made a morbid joke about suicide. Certainly not appropriate. Yeah, I can make the argument about laughter, but hyper-masculinity sometimes like, oh, brah, be tough. Even I, religious professional, happy to have a group hug, happy to talk about emotions, still has an issue with that. And I know my friends, I've seen it. Sometimes we'll be in a bar, and they'll make stupid jokes about like, what's the phrase I'm looking for? You know, how many women they've slept with, stupid language, tough macho stuff. I almost got into a bar fight one time. That being said, I refuse to let someone push me around for no good reason, who wasn't just some pain in the butt, drunken, you know what I mean? But that being said, like, how many of my friends are being macho, how many times am I being macho? The cost of war, we're promoting certain mentality, is obviously detrimental. Like, one of the reasons I have a hope in my life is the Women's March after Trump got elected. Because I'm just like, men trashing over women on a regular basis was my norm in life. For example, even in my time in Germany, you know, you go to clubs, whether it be dancing or strip club, whatever the case would be, they'd be like, oh, some women have no souls. I'm like, well, why? You're being more promiscuous than any woman I know. You're being more of a soul eater than anybody. Like, you're just toxic. You're calling other people soulless because you have no soul. Again, I'm a sort of woke person. Some of my friends refuse to make that leap. But I'm grateful again, the Women's March showed me that feminism, pro-women's choice, my fellow anti-war veterans, a lot of them, for gender equality, because the personal cost of war, a lot of the women veterans I know were raped in the military, or sexually harassed, sexually assaulted, or dealing with a lot of crap in some way, shape, or form. And that's the norm for women. It's just even worse in the military. When I talk about the moral injury before, I don't know if y'all remember it, but moral injury is a term where it deals with betrayal, deals with having killed someone or not being able to prevent someone's death. Now that could happen hypothetically if you were robbed at gunpoint or something traumatic could happen to you. The military, I feel like, is just a more prone place for that to happen. Whether it be sexual assault on women, whether it be having killed people as per people's occupational duty. Whether it be, for example, for me thinking that my government betrayed me because they spent all this money on the military, but not to take care of the homeless people. Whatever the dilemma is, moral injury is no joke. That's certainly the personal cost that several of my friends and I have had. I'm forever dealing with it. And I'm happy to deal with it for the rest of my days because I know my people got my back. Yeah, that's right. But that's the remark I wanted to close on. Personal cost of war is wide variety. I tried to make it funny in some cases, but it is no joke. And yeah, that's what I'm going to close on.
So Ben, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. Before I sort of talk about my own experiences, I'd like to point out this booklet that we published last year, The First Ambush, Effects of Army Training and Employment. Now obviously tonight you're going to hear from Julio, you've already heard from Julio, and you're going to hear from myself from our own personal perspectives of the costs of war, but this is a much more academic approach, looks into not hundreds but maybe tens of, like 80, 90 different studies about the impacts of military training and service. It's very comprehensive, and I'd recommend it to you. It's for sale on our website. You can buy it from me tonight for a £5. It's worth every penny anyway. There you go. If you want a more academic and wide-ranging approach, you can purchase a copy of that. Yeah, it's funny because as an organisation we're often talking about. It's one of the things we try not to focus on, the personal costs, because it sounds like whining, doesn't it? And sounds like, oh, poor me, look what's happened to me. And, I can always point out when soldiers, for example, talk about what happened to them in Iraq, and I say, well, you volunteered, I volunteered. Think how bad it was for the people who didn't volunteer. Think about how bad it was for the people in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think we should keep that in mind when Julio and I are speaking tonight, is whatever's happened to us, it's probably nowhere near what's happened to those people over there. And I suppose that's the thing I want to start on really, is that I was a volunteer. I wouldn't say I was a, what's the term that gets used? Economic conscript. Right. So there's a term that's used on the left quite a lot. This idea that everyone who's in the British Army or in the American military is there because they've got nowhere else to go, or it's the only place they can get a wage. Well, it's not true. See, people are pushed. If you look at where people are recruited from in the UK, they are from more deprived areas. They're from the southwest, the north, Scotland, Northern Ireland. But that's not the whole story. People are motivated to join the military for 100 different reasons. And that economic conscript argument does have some weight in that people come from those deprived areas. But why isn't everyone else from those areas joining? The British military right now has got a massive recruitment crisis. Why aren't all these kids in these areas of high employment just joining the military? So it's not as simple as that. And I think that's something I've learned over the last 13 years since I got out of the military, is it's very black and white, or very, what look like simple, straightforward answers to things often are not the whole truth, and everything is a lot more complicated than that. So I volunteered for all this. I grew up wanting to be a soldier. Lots of people in my family were in the military. I've spoken about it before. My granddad was in the Navy. My other granddad, who I haven't spoken about actually before, he wasn't in the military. He was 18 in 1944. Was exactly the right age to have been conscripted into the British Army, and you know, a lot of the guys he grew up with would have gone to D-Day and fought through into Germany. But he was in what's a protected profession. He was a bricklayer, and for some reason he wasn't conscripted into the military. And on one side of my family, I had all these people who'd been in the military, and on the other side of my family, I had someone who I really looked up to, this granddad who hadn't been in the military. And I felt kind of, I've been thinking about it recently, I almost felt an obligation that I should join the military because he hadn't. You know, like, and he never spoke to me about it, but some of his friends spoke to me about it in pubs over the years. You know, imagine being on a building site after the war, 1950, 1948, 1950, and the guys are laying a brick. So, what did you do during the war? You know, I was there on D-Day. I was in North Africa, and I just thought, well, what must it have been like for my granddad, the one who wasn't in the military? Well, actually, I was kept to you know, build houses or whatever. I think that did have a certain influence on me, you know, like wanting to join up, you know, to sort of like do it for him in a way. But there was a whole load of others. Like I'm saying, all of this thing is very complex. And on other occasions, I've talked about my other side of the family, where all my cousins are in the military and my granddad was in the Navy and all the rest of it. So just trying to give a different sort of like, these things are complicated. What I can tell you is when I went to the recruitment office, I didn't ask how long I'd have to sign up for, what the wages were, how much holiday I'd get, what would happen if I got injured. None of that mattered, right? So that whole economic argument goes out the window, doesn't it, if I'm not asking those questions. I was determined to be a soldier, but in the Army Cadets for, I don't know, 5 years, and that was what I wanted to do, and no one was going to stop me from doing it. I did the intelligence test, got a relatively high score, and then told the recruiter that I wanted to be in the parachute regiment, which you need the lowest score to get into. Intelligence-wise, you need to be physically determined. Just so happened the recruiter was in the parachute regiment, so he was quite happy with that decision of mine. And I think Julio touched on it, but when we talk about the effects on soldiers of war, we have to take that back a little stage to the effects of training. Because everyone who joins the military, no matter what profession they go into, goes through some form of military training. And even if someone never deploys to a war zone or never goes into combat, this can have deep and long-lasting effects on their lives afterwards. And this report that I talked about earlier goes into detail about this, about the effects of military training that it has in the long term. And you might be saying, well, how's that an effect of war? Well, we train our military for war. Because we anticipate and expect and plan to go to war, we train young people to be soldiers. It's entirely connected, you can't have one without the other. So what happened during military training? Well, I was in military training for 6 months. When we first, on the first day, an old captain came into the room. He must have been maybe early 50s, late 40s, early 50s, he looks ancient to us. And there was a room with 35 of us in the room, and he said, only 7 of you are going to be here at the end of the course, or 8, I can't remember what he said. And I was looking around the room thinking, wow, there's a lot of guys who look a lot tougher than me. And if you'd have gone around that room and asked why are you here, you'd have got 35 different answers. You really would have. Because like I say, there's hundreds of reasons for joining the military. However, at the end of that training, after 6 months, when there were only 8 of us left in that room, you could have asked the question, why are you here? And you'd have got one answer: to go to war and kill the enemy. That was the answer. That was what had happened to us. We'd gone from being civilians, even pro-military, you know, kids who'd been in cadets for 5 years, but we'd been changed from people who had their own ideas about things, their own motivations, their own ambitions, into people whose primary ambition on this planet was to go to war and kill the enemy. And I think the 3 core pillars that were instilled in us during that training were obedience, to obey orders, loyalty, not to the United Kingdom, but to our regiments. That was of massive importance, and to kill the enemy. And you know, I haven't got long tonight, but I'll give another talk about this in terms of how you take a child or a young adult of 16, 17, 18, 19, and remove what are called the barriers to kill. If we go back, and there's loads of evidence to back this up, if we go back to the Civil War, 1860s in America, it turns out that only about 5 to 10% of the troops were actually firing at the enemy. Go to the First World War, similar stats. Second World War, the numbers up a little bit, but not to a great level. You're still looking at sort of like, I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but it's not great. It's like 10-20% of infantry soldiers firing their weapons to kill the enemy. And this is the war for freedom against the Nazis. So after that war, the military started to really look into this and came up with incredible training techniques and psychological techniques to increase that number. By the time you get into the war in Vietnam, you've got 50% of soldiers firing their weapons to kill the enemy, and during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, 90% of soldiers. And that's to kill the enemy. Okay, so we're talking about killing someone who has been identified as an enemy soldier. However, if you've read the reports in The Guardian over the last, not The Guardian, Middle East Eye, by a former Guardian journalist called Ian Gabain, who's just published a report highlighting how British soldiers during Iraq and Afghanistan, it's not just British soldiers, American soldiers as well, were basically given the green light to shoot civilians who were considered to be observing for the enemy. So that's where we've gone on this journey, over the last 100 years, from an army composed of people who had a natural reticence towards killing, to a much smaller army where everyone inside it is quite okay with this concept. So when you think about that, when you think about your own children, are these three qualities that you would want them to hold? Like blind obedience, loyalty to an institution, above, and when we're talking about loyalty to an institution, we're talking about loyalty to that institution over the law. So I remember on occasions where the Royal Military Police would come into our unit and try and question people about stuff that had happened, and the loyalty was not to the law, but to the maintenance of the integrity of our unit. Are those really things that you want our young people to be holding? I would argue against that. But when we're thinking about the cost of war and the cost of military training on our soldiers, these things don't go away. These things are instilled in you at a young age, at a very impressionable age. So whilst other kids are in university or higher education, having all sorts of other values and ideas instilled in them, these things are being instilled into us. And our brains are still growing, and our brains are absorbing this stuff at a crucial point in time when long-term ideas are formed and things like that. So anyway, I think we talked about that long enough. I'll just quickly move on from that. So deployment, and as Mike said in the intro there, I was deployed to Northern Ireland 3 times, Macedonia, deployed to Afghanistan, and deployed to Iraq. And it was Iraq for me that really sort of like turned things round, or turned things on their head, would probably be more appropriate analogy. Just talk about a couple of things over there, and there's a lot happening over there, and any of you who've seen me speak before us talking in detail about some of this stuff. But there's 2 things that kind of sort of like stick in my mind. One is participation in what would be called in the Brest night raids. So one of the jobs that we had in Iraq was to capture so-called high-value targets. So we were looking for Iraqis who were involved in the insurgency against our occupation, against our presence. And on a human level, I just want you to imagine that it's, imagine we're not in this room. I want you to imagine that it's 2 AM in the morning and you're in your own home. So it's like a Jack and all things. So you're in your own house and it's dark and it's quiet and everyone's in bed. So you and your wife, you and your husband are in bed in one room, you've got your kids in the other room, everything's quiet. And whilst you're sleeping, myself, 20 other men with assault rifles, shotguns, grenades, explosives, crowbars, handcuffs, hoods, all sorts of equipment are sneaking up to your house whilst you're asleep, sneaking up to your house. And whilst you're asleep, we are strapping a huge amount of explosive to your front door, or maybe the side of your house to a wall or a window. And the first thing you know about our presence is when those explosives go off. It's still dark, a massive explosion rips through your house, there's dust, bits of wall, bits of door, all sorts of stuff all over your house. And before you've even got out of bed or worked out what the fuck is going on, you can hear men in your house. They're obviously weighed down, they're heavy, you can hear them coming into the house, coming up the stairs. What are you doing? Too late. We smashed into your room, we dragged you out of bed, You've been separated from your family. You can't see what's going on, but your kids are in another room, you can hear them crying. Your wife's in another room, and you're being held at gunpoint. And someone's shouting at you in your language, but a kind of pidgin version of your language, asking you what your name is, who the fuck are you, maybe slapping you around. Whilst that's happening, one of my jobs was to go around your house with a postal sack, which is quite ironic because I'm a postman now. With a postal sack, and to ransack your house. Strip all the cupboards open, all the drawers open, filing cabinets, whatever else you got. Take everything out. We're looking for bank statements, passports, money, computers, mobile phones, weapons, anything that you've got that we might think either will prove that you're an insurgent or lead us on to someone who might be an insurgent. So we'd ransack your house, put all this stuff into big sacks, and then maybe after 20 minutes, 30 minutes, we're taking all males of military age, no matter who you are, no matter what your protests of innocence are, and we're taking you through the hole where your front door used to be, or the side of your house used to be. Your kids are crying, your wife's crying, and we take all those things that you need to survive in the world, bank statements, passports, money, computers, phones, and we take them with you. You've got a hood over your head, or maybe you've got some blacked out goggles and some earphones over your head. Your hands are held together with like a plastic cuff that looks like the plastic ties you use for plumbing and electrics. And then your hands are held together so tightly that the blood is swelling up in your hands. You pissed yourself, and you've never been on a helicopter before, you put on a helicopter, taken away. You don't know where you're going, you don't know how long you're going to be away, you don't know what's happened to your family are in the house, they don't know what's happened to you, you don't know how long you're going to be away. And that's the job I was doing out in Iraq. And it started to play on my mind. For one reason, as a soldier, I thought it was ineffective. I thought that what we were doing was actually fueling the insurgency over there. I thought every time we went into someone's house and did that, we were creating new enemies. Also, I wasn't convinced, and neither were a lot of people, about the intelligence that we were getting. We were told we were going after so-and-so, and when we got there, someone else was there. But we would still take them in. On one night, we went out and decided we weren't going to take someone because they'd given us a convincing story about why they were there and who they were. And so we left them. We left them in the building. And I felt quite proud that we'd made that decision. And we got back, and then our commander was taken next door and told, if we tell you to bring someone in, you bring them in. And the next night, another unit was sent out to bring the same people back in. So a lot of things were going on in the head. Why are we doing this? How is this helping? This CO of the unit I was in at the time came out to brief us on what was going on and admitted that Iraq was the first war that he had been involved in that we were going to lose. Never heard a CO say that before. And he was worried that the unit I was in was becoming the secret police of Baghdad. You know, it's quite a devastating thing to hear, having grown up with stories of how we liberated Europe from the Nazis and fought the Japanese and their all this brutal stuff, and you look around and you think, oh, well, this is us, this is what we're doing. Yeah, and I can see the times going on. So there's a whole load of stuff that happened out there that really shook shook me in terms of my idea about what being a British soldier was, what it meant, what I was supposed to be doing, and what the reality was. There's like a disconnect between what you've been told through stories from family members, through films, from books, from listening to other guys who've been in before you, and what you're actually doing. And it's kind of hard to like hold those two things together. It was for me anyway. You know, I was incapable of holding those two things. They're contradictions. I've been reading a book lately, written 2 years after or 3 years after the First World War. It's called Disenchantment. I think that kind of describes how I felt, disenchanted. You know, I grew up believing that Britain was this great country. And I know this is kind of naive. Loads of people in that war room said, "Oh, well, how comes you didn't know how bad we were before you went to Iraq?" But you know, like I didn't. You know, ask most kids, ask most young people in this country, ask most people in this country what they think about Britain. They don't know we get up to this. Turns out we've got a long history of doing this, but I didn't know that. Yeah, disenchantment. I think when Julio was talking about moral injury, I think that use of the term post World War I kind of, I think they're talking about the same thing. A disenchantment, like a realisation of what you thought was real is not, or what you thought was true is not. In the past, I talked about it's almost like the Wizard of Oz, and you're all on the yellow brick road to go to see the wizard, which is war. You know, and you think war is going to be this thing, and then you look behind the curtain and realise it's something else, and that changes your life. Yeah, that moral injury, I think, is disenchantment, and it's basically when you're brought up to believe something, firmly believe something, and then find out that that's either not true or that you've done something that's opposed to that, whether it's killing someone or whatever. So, you know, from my own personal perspective, you know, like how did that affect me? You know, what were the costs? Well, there's a legal cost. Because when I started talking about all this stuff, I got taken to the High Court and given a lifetime injunction. Easy cost to describe. This is just for this meeting really, because like I say, I don't like to focus on these things, but you know, I've got physical, not that you'd notice, but physical disablements as a result of my service in the army. Got permanent ringing in both ears from high explosives and gunfire. I've got 40% hearing loss. I've got chilblains, which means that every winter from sort of like October to February, March, my skin flares up from a cold injury and like I'm just covered in sort of like blisters. Then there's the sort of post-traumatic stress disorder side of things. And when I first got out of the military, a mate of mine had been in before me and we met for a beer and he said, "Oh, you've got PTSD." And I was like, "Fuck off, Terry, what are you on about?" Because I didn't see it, because he had it. He knew what he was looking at. And it's funny because PTSD is kind of like, I don't know, it's portrayed in films or portrayed on the TV and as if it's like a specific set of symptoms and they describe what the symptoms are, a bit like war. Like when you're growing up, people describe to you what war's going to be like. And then when you get there, it doesn't look anything like it. You're like, is this really a war? Because it doesn't match up with your preconceived ideas, and that's a bit like PTSD. You're doing all this strange stuff, you're reacting in these strange ways, all this strange stuff's happening to you, but it doesn't fit in with what you've been told PTSD is, or how it's been explained to you. So you go, well, that's not this is something else. It took me a long time to work that out. You know, I go for weeks with like massive amounts of adrenaline, you know, that feeling just before you go into a race. And then imagine like the sort of reactions that result from that. They're not rational reactions. Constantly looking for enemies. And I think this as well, you know, like a lot of these things kind of like mutate over time. So the classic PTSD thing that you got from people in Northern Ireland is that they would say that as they were walking down the street, they were constantly looking at the windows and constantly looking at the doors, looking for people about to take a shot at them. But what happens over time is that constantly looking for the enemy or looking for danger kind of like just mutates into everything. And so you start to look for it, or your brain is looking for it, without subconsciously, without you looking for it, in everything. And so a boss will say something to you the wrong way, and before you know it, you're throwing cups of tea at him, or you know, threatening to throw some off a balcony, or And flashbacks happen in you know, like in the films they're portrayed as if you're back, you know, in Iraq, back in Vietnam, back in Afghanistan. And in my experience, anyway, they don't really happen like that. I was an ambulance man for 10 years after FD Army, probably not a good job for someone like me to get into. And I was working in East London, and quite often in the middle of the night, we'd go into council blocks full of Bangladeshi people, and when we'd go into the houses, people would phone for an ambulance, by the way, not so just re-clarify that. Going to the houses, there'd be families in very tight living conditions, you know, maybe a whole family living asleep in one room. And before you know, I'm getting really angry. I'd be getting really angry. My mate, who I worked with for years, used to just go in the van, go and sit in the van. I used to go to sit in the van, not take it, completely take myself out of the situation. It took me ages to work out, this is just like Iraq. I mean, it's night time, we're creeping up to this house, we're going through the door, there's all these kids sleeping on the floor, the smells, the food, the look of the people. You know, like, and people say, oh, that's fucking racist. My subconscious brain doesn't know what racism is, right? None of our subconscious brains do, they just react. And my brain was telling me, you're in Baghdad. Now, it wasn't some movie-style recollection, it was just certain things produced that. I was involved in whatever you call it, a mission to recover body parts, bodies and equipment from a Hercules that had got shot down coming out of Baghdad. And for years afterwards, every time I smelled petrol or fuel, I'd be like getting angry and all the rest of it. It took me ages to work, oh, it's that. Because this field where we went to this plane, it was covered in petrol or aero fuel. So all these things, you know, like, and there's loads of people out there, there's loads of veterans out there who are like having all of these things like flicking off in their heads, whether it's the military training, whether it's the things they've experienced, and that they might not have even put two and two together. They might not even work it out. Their wives will be pulling their hairs out, threatening to leave them or kicking them out of the house. They'll be turning to booze to try and deal with it all. And it's not diagnosed, it's gone unrecognised, you know, what's happening to these people. People just think they're angry or they're just pissheads or they're just awkward, you know, but it's not, there's something else going on. And that moral injury thing, you know, I completely recognise that, you know, and that, I think the moral injury is separate to PTSD. PTSD is your subconscious brain kicking off at perceived threat, at reliving instances. The psychologist once described it to me, if you've ever been attacked by a bear, which I haven't, your brain, when that incident happens, like, seeds, like, a little bit of your brain, seeds the rest of your brain. And what it does is it goes, this is what a bear smells like, this is what a bear looks like, this is what they sound like. And if you ever hear or smell or sense anything like that again, your brain doesn't need to think about it, it just goes, bear. So you know to run. And that's what PTSD does to you, like all these different things that have happened to you, it kind of like puts all these like little tripwires in your brain, and anything that looks or sounds like it just flicks off that fight or flight freeze mechanism. And all three things can happen. I've been in situations where I've had to walk. The flight thing isn't really a run thing for me, it's just I need to leave the situation, which used to happen at work a lot in the ambulance service. The anger thing, the fight thing, that's happened a bit. And the freeze thing, you know, I've been in the street in the West End, just like unable to move, and someone's come up to me and tried to sell me heroin. And I said, no, I don't do that. He goes, come on, don't. No, the state of what I must have looked at the time for him to think that it's a heroin addict. These things are real, you know, and I think within society, from the establishment point of view, they would rather these things didn't exist. They don't want them to exist. You know, a mate of mine was in the High Court this week, Fijian, who just won a case against the MOD for post-traumatic stress disorder compounded by racial discrimination. Now they paid him off. They didn't want this going to the High Court. You know, all of these sort of like individual costs, they don't want these things to be known because they're going to hurt recruitment and they're going to make people question whether we should be training our kids to do this and whether we should be deploying them into these war zones, especially in the 21st century when you look at the outcome of those wars. Absolute disasters. Whatever you've been told, Iraq, military defeat. Afghanistan, military defeat. Libya, you know, I don't even know what to call that. you know, the outrageous consequences of that conflict. So, sorry to go on and on and on. Yeah, sure. So I'm not going to go into any more detail about all that kind of personal stuff. But you know, everything Julio said is chimes with me. You know, like kind of, and all of the things you've heard about post-traumatic stress disorder and moral injury. You know, those things have affected me. I think in some way, I just accept. I do, and you know, like, you can argue with me about this afterwards if you want, but I accept these things as results of what I've done and what I've experienced. That's how I live with it. That's how I deal with it. How I am now is a result of what I've lived through, and I can't change that. It's what's happened, you know. And it's not half as bad as what's happened to them kids out there. One of the things that stays with me that, you know, I will never leave my mind is the look on those kids' faces in Iraq when you're in their house at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I know that look. I can feel what those kids felt. Why are you doing this? What are you doing? You know. So whatever's happened to myself, Julio, and there's a lot of other veterans in the room tonight, you know, it's not that. That's, you know. And also, you know, I'm probably a little bit different to other people. I don't really subscribe to any sort of political ideology, but, and obviously the people in this room, I imagine, have been anti-war activists for quite a few years. But what myself and Julio and other veterans bring back to this country, you know, like when I'm getting angry at the boss, or angry at my wife, angry at my kids, violence, antisocial behaviour, alcoholism, all of the bad stuff I've done since I left the military, we're bringing back the war, bringing it back. Like, this is a cost that society has to pay. You know, you train us, you deploy us. You can't get that, that doesn't come for free, you know. We need to be much more honest and much more aware of the true costs of the conflicts that we train and plan and execute. The absolute, all of the costs, rather than looking at kind of like these tiny little segments.
Thanks a lot.